Hey everybody, this is Brad Dyke saying hi to everybody and saying today we are going to do something of a little bit of a sidetrack. As you notice in the background, it is very quiet because there's no more data center. Yes, it is in pieces and in parts, but as I'm going through my new job with a new company in their operations environment, I decided it was time to do something fairly big. Now, if you know anything about an architect and a hardware specialist, you know that he basically gets hardware that lasts. And that's an exact representation of myself. Here you are looking at a G as in George, 73, J as in Jeep, H as in Hotel, ASUS 17-inch system. Got it in 2009. Still use it today quite heavily. It's an i7, about 2,500 bucks. Pretty nice. But as you can see, and the reflection here is that it is starting to get a little bit on the age and it's a little fragile. But the reason why I picked this model is for several reasons. One, got a coating on this that's really durable. And though it looks kind of dusty, it's not. Believe it or not. Its sub-panel sections are very accessible. I've had no difficulty with it. It's got SSD on board with no issues whatsoever. An excellent platform for doing everything I wanted to do, but it also has something that was important to me, and that was the nature of how it was venting its heat. Now, this is a pretty powerful laptop in its day. It pretty much beat everybody most of the time, not because of its ability to perform, but because it had the ability of staying fairly cool, even at a passive state. Now, what I mean by that is if you look at the angle aspect of this chassis, it rises to the back and drops to the front, which promotes convection effect. And convection effect means that when your heat sinks are active, they're generating their own air movement without fan, which means air resistance is lower, and that means more air can be moved. And trust me, when I get this guy going, if I'm running a database or something like that, when I'm going mobile, and I'm sitting there doing my stuff, this heat out here, it's real. And that's how I know that my ASUS does such a great job. Now, I still use this heavily, but it's my research lab system now as I do work in my data center. But today I decided I was going to buy myself a new notebook that would be in correlation to what I'm trying to do. Now, ASUS had this previous notebook at 2009, and I went through quite a bit to spec it out to make sure it's exactly what I wanted it to do. Plus, it was passive/active, which means I have a lot of functionality in it. Durable, functional. It has a great interior display. It does all the functions that I need. It's a full-size keyboard, no nonsense contact. It's a single membrane surface, and that single membrane surface really is protected when it comes to the internal components. So what do I have here as my replacement? Well, it's called an F17 TUF series laptop, and it is actually the X-ray, that's Foxtrot X-ray 707 Zulu, as you can see right there. And it carries all the specs, 32 gigs of RAM, all of the functional capacity on board. And I'm opening it for the first time here. It has basically a gamer's kind of strategy, even though I'm not a heavy gamer. I really don't do it that much these days, even though I'm a legacy gamer. And under here, under this cloth sheath, I actually have the laptop itself. So what I'm going to do here is to pause, pull the laptop out of its casing, and take a look at it. Okay, so now we have it out of its wrapping, and we'll go ahead and lift this up so that we can remove the protective coater on it. But as you can see here, as I set this up, and I set his brother up, actually in this case, grandfather. This is grandfather right here. And this is the FX70 series platform. Now, the key things that are important here for a professional, not necessarily a gaming guy, but a professional, is the bevel interfaces of the actual how the LED setup is set in play. Now, this is a borderline plastic to metal frame structure. The metal frame structure is actually the exterior lid side of this, and that means I've got some durability. In other words, they can be in a backpack without taking much damage. And when you travel like I do, you want to make sure that you can do it. You have a surface parallel membrane set up here. It's not quite the same as the open membrane that we have over here, but the feel is very similar. And yes, it is for gaming, so there are the common hotkeys. It's a glow-in-the-dark keyboard, which is important because of my failing eyeballs. And the key detail here is also the fact that our surface response is bigger. So as you can see here, you've got like 5 inches versus 3 inches, and over here you only have 2 inches versus 3 inches. Quite a difference. I mean, look, I placed my hand there, and then I placed my hand here, and I've got almost a full inch clearance all the way around. Now, that's something that which you can actually take advantage of if you're into Linux, Mint, or Ubuntu. You can actually use this in a little bit different format. But as you can see, we have an iCore set up here for an i7. Yeah, I picked an i7 over an i9 because, frankly, I just don't need the extra heat, and I don't have the functional output requirements for an i9, not for a mobile device. Now, the next thing to think about is by looking at the back of this, we have to understand a little bit more about the ventilation process of this unit. And if you pay close attention, you actually see how they did the heat sinks here. Now, the heat sinks here don't have as much of an incline as the predecessor here, the G73, but it is still an incline. And it has a second area effect here, which is I have to suspect an air intake / heat sink ventilation process, which is a greater amount of open surface area for the ventilation. But if you flip it over, you're going to understand why very quickly. Remember what I said about the incline effect? Well, in this chassis, the air induction is up here to the front, which creates a slight angle, and the heat goes up at that angle, creating convection. Well, here they want to step further. Now they have a little bit of ventilation up here, but they've sparred out the ventilation here in front of the actual primary heat sinks, which are in the back here, which means the rise in convection effect is more like a kettle effect. That's more airflow to moving a heat than actually the incline effect of the older notebook, without necessarily having the fans doing much. So the fans don't work as much when dealing with the heat as they would have if they were on a little bit older format. Not that the older format isn't good. It's actually pretty doggone good. But as you can see here, we have our port access. Again, there's our ventilation effect right there. There are the vent ports. And of course, our key lock. And then on the other side, we have the setup. And what I do recommend is, going wireless is a great strategy, but it is not the right strategy all the time. Secure connectivity is actually just as critical. Again, there's the ventilation effect, creating more air circulation. The Cat5, the HDMI, 2 Class Cs, and a 3.1. I've got a 3.1 on each side of the system here to mirror my requirements. Now, there are no specialized actual interfaces on the front end of this unit. They usually had SD cards or something like that in the past, but in this case, that's not the situation here. So, we have a metal housing. On the exterior, we have a good ventilation base underneath, and we have a fairly centralized point of mass. Now, I do notice that on the bottom here, as you can see, there seems to be a support structure here. This might worry me a little, because 2 reasons. One, this is going to pop off. No glue in the world is going to keep that in place if you use your notebook substantially. So that's something to worry about in the future. The other concern I have is this reduction in the mid-cavity area here. That's actually reducing air intake space in the inside chassis. So you're a little bit more reliant on your fan than you necessarily have to be. Now over here, that's not the case at all. The air induction in here is from the front to the back. And that's really nice because most of the front ventilation area access points flow from the front heading to the back. So that makes this notebook a really self-sustaining, keeping it pretty cool base notebook. When you're not using its firepower, it's going to easily keep itself cool. This one is a smaller, more reduced format, as you can see here, right there. And, the height is considerable. So when we put these side by side and we do a height comparison on them, as you can see here, the reduction's pretty nice. But with reduction comes potential risk. And the last risk, and it's a very serious test that has to be done with laptops, is the corner flex test. The corner flex test is going to tell you how much integrity the display screen actually has. Now, most people don't like and should not lift their monitor like this, but it's actually the right thing to do because it's going to actually give you an idea of how fragile your laptop is. And this one is pretty doggone capable. It's got some rigidity to it, but a little bit of flex, and it's all you want. You don't want a super rigid display screen because those are the kind that snap. Plus, you don't want the type that are very flexible because when that happens, you run the risk of damaging the crystal. You want something in the middle. Outside of that, this is the first time this machine has been powered up. It's a brand new unit, and we're going to go ahead and allow it to begin the process of posting. And to allow it to come up, it has 2 terabytes of storage capacity. And as you can see, the LCD display is posting, and of course there is a red, green, blue LED display set up in the actual keyboard side, which is nice. But it is just that. It's nice. Now we're going to give this a little bit of a chance here to boot up. Okay, so I've basically done the 1, 2, 3s on the registration process here. Getting this signed in. Now, I'm not changed this at all in any way, shape, or form, but I will. I'll be pulling out the NVMe 2 terabyte drive out and putting in a 1 terabyte Mint drive. I'm going to test this environment on Mint, but I do know already that between the G73 and the FX70 here, TUF, that there's about a 22% difference in performance between the two, which is really saying something, considering this is a 2009 system versus a 2022/23, because we're in the back end of the year 2020. I'm sorry, we're in the back end of the 2022 in November coming up. This model here is surprisingly not that advanced in comparison to its predecessor. Now, the chipsets and things like that, I don't get into those battles because I already knew the specs on the chipsets. I'm not going to say who's the tweakest, the neatest, the maddest, and so on. I am actually focused on what machine has the best durability, functionality versus its lifetime and lifespan. So with that being said, the other key detail that I think is really valuable here is that when you look over here, that's the power supply, if you look here on the side, and that powers this notebook. And then you look at this power supply that powers this notebook. Now, the ASUS has a lot of good notebooks, but if you've ever noticed the power supply being fairly small on a laptop that's supposedly an i7 or in the equivalency of, well, the only problem with that strategy is, okay, you can say that and you can do that, but the reality of the fact is this is a step-down processor. In other words, it may perform, but it's not going to generate the necessary output performance-wise to meet the requirements of what you need. So the answer to that question is, what do you do in regards to that? Great question. Paying attention to the actual ability of the output of the power supply is a direct reflection of the chipset and the CPU functionality of this chassis. And that gives you an ability here that is really sustained overall performance and the kind of what I call necessity that I need to have when it comes to working with a laptop that can, for instance, do what we call how would you say this? Where we'd want to see the performance capacity that matches to that of maybe running an MDB. Yeah, you can run a small database on a laptop if you're careful and you know what you're doing. But for now, let me go ahead and get this set up on the Wi-Fi so I can see if it syncs up pretty quickly. Okay, So now we've got this set up and we are now connected. So we are in a good shape and we have bandwidth and we have functionality. And this will allow me to run the next component test that which I need. And that is to see if right out of the box, the system is going to actually be ready to sync, ready to initiate, and do what it needs to do. So I don't need that overhead here, and I use Mint. Linux is my primary, but if you look there, it definitely synced up quickly, really quickly. So I'm going to go ahead and allow it to do that and get this process done. So what I need is a performance notebook that's going to do what I needed to do. It would be nice to play a game or two on it, but that's not the reason why I got this gaming notebook. I got this gaming notebook because it has survivability. It's going to be comparable to a very successful laptop, in my opinion, that ASUS produced. And I've gotten many different types of ASUS platforms, servers, and so on. Their laptops are really genuinely right up there. And I hope the situation in Taiwan gets better so that they can be more successful. But if not, I hope they consider the idea of maybe establishing a base of operations in the United States so they can continue to be successful as they always have been. Well, at this point in stage, I'm going to go ahead and put this on a temporary pause. I've been doing quite a bit and made quite a mess of my lab in the process of rebuilding my data center. And this notebook is going to help me with that as I begin the process of documenting and putting everything in place and getting it all set up in the way I need. But this is my 2 cents in regards to working with good notebooks. I think the Foxtrot X-Ray 70 model is absolutely worth that investment. And I own one now. And, look how many years it took me to buy the next notebook. But I buy them based on their quality and their survivability. They're able to get to where we need them to be. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's very specific. I did that because I find that most reviews of the ASUS notebooks are very general. They're trying to push a lot of product through the window because, frankly, ASUS has a lot of notebooks. But in this case, I was very selective specifically because that's where the quality lies. Well, you guys have fun. I hope you have a blessed weekend. God bless and take care. Bye-bye.